Hello, fellow explorers. For the second time ever, welcome back to Story Spelunking. I'm Sierra.
And I'm Stephanie. Today we will be digging into the Don Bluth and Gary Goldman's 1997 animated classic, Anastasia.
Now, for this one, we don't have so much of a shared history, well, a shared recent history, but I have a long term connection with Anastasia. In the early aughts of the 2000s, we were going to pick up my uncle from from overseas. He was coming back from overseas, and if you've never been overseas before, out of the country, in a lot of countries, it's very easy to find bootleg DVDs. I'm sure you can find them here too. Not that I'm encouraging that. But overseas, it's really easy to find bootleg DVDs. And my uncle brought my brother and I back a lot of them. He brought us back this box, and it said like 1,000 classic Disney movies, many of which were not Disney, but were a classic, like Pinocchio 3000. But most importantly, these discs, which were four movies to one disc, contained what would become one of my all-time favorite movies and childhood favorite, Anastasia.
And unlike Sierra, I did not grow up with this movie, and I watched it for the first time about 2 weeks ago for this podcast because I had just, I don't know, never came across it as a kid. I don't know. But the more that I've since watched the movie two times now. But then as I did more research into it and just listened to the music more, the more I fell in love with the characters, the animation style, and of course the score itself.
This movie, I don't think I'm even being dramatic by saying changed the course of my life, and I'll get into this more later. It actually led to what I majored in college. It created a love of cities and cultures, but from the very opening moments of this movie, my imagination was captured.
Mhm. Yeah, it's just the way even St. Petersburg is portrayed, and then later on in the movie in Paris. And I was actually watching the movie with my sister the other day, and she said that the way that they portrayed Paris reminded her of impressionist paintings like Monet, and like it was just gorgeous looking at this film. And I really can't believe that it came out in 1997 because how well it stood the test of time. And I think a lot of it has to do with the way the animation was done back then. It was very much less computer generated, and a lot of it had to be hand drawn, if I understood it correctly.
I think the hand drawing, I make this joke to my brother all the time because he's a barista and I tell him that his coffees are better because he puts love into them and then he gets embarrassed because he's 16. Um, that's just me being silly with my brother. But I think it's true both for the coffee and this
Mhm.
animation because you can almost feel the time and the care and the love that they put into these drawings, this art.
Exactly. And I was watching this behind the scenes like documentary, and they interviewed, of course, the directors and a lot of the animators. And Gary Goldman said that animation is an art medium that lifts you out of the chair. And if it's done right, that's the key, it will make you fly. I think that perfectly encapsulates what you were just saying with how, well, it's hard to actually, say for sure that the care put into this movie is seen directly as a result of that. But I think that him explaining it that way is a perfect encapsulation as to why, from the beginning, this movie really captures your attention.
To give you a visual of how the animation makes me feel, it literally made me feel like I was going to fly, like angel wings were going to sprout, and I was going to fly up to heaven. Especially the clothing. I, even in my studying history, I love historical clothing and costuming. I love clothing and modern fashions.
Mhm.
But something about just the richness of the fabrics and the gold, especially, like if you're watching this movie and you look at the gold on their outfit, it feels like you could reach out and touch it. The
Mhm.
diamonds glitter like diamonds. Even the filigree on the buildings, that's gold, and the lights just sparkle. And you can tell Even just the clothing the characters are wear, they put a lot of care and research into. The kokoshniks, which is the Russian style tiaras that are, you've probably seen them in portraits and pictures.
Mhm.
They have them in other places in Europe too that are the tall, they're like standing up and then they circle around your
Yeah.
head. So they put care and sparkle into that. And when they go to Paris, even the cut of the men's suits is pretty accurate to the time period.
Yeah, and then when they stand out of one of the stores and it has Chanel across
They
the
are
top of it,
literally in the Chanel store.
that cracked me up the first time I saw that. I was like, oh,
And that's period accurate too.
because that's an old company. Exactly. So it's not just the scenery animation, but also, like you're saying, the way that the characters are dressed is very interesting. And you can tell just if even if you watch, obviously they use some tricks with regarding to duplicating background characters and stuff that sometimes you can spot. But even like if you pay attention to the background characters or the background, like for example, in the opening sequence in the palace and the seat that the grandmother is sitting in has the the double-headed eagle symbol on the back of it. Just like simple things like that. Like you don't need to put that in there, but it
Circling
is there.
circling back to your impressionist painting comment your sister made, I think they were able to put such beautiful, intricate details into this because I'm sure this is really common in animated movies. I don't really know enough about animation to speak on this, but the backgrounds are almost still like they still feel very vivid, but the backgrounds are still, which makes their details, it allows detail to be there more because they didn't have to draw it over and over. But it also makes the characters feel like they're jumping out at you because they feel like they're coming out of a portrait, almost like the
Mm-hmm.
dancers do in the scenes where they're singing Once Upon a December, which we'll get into more later. But the still background allows the moving pieces to stand out that much more.
Exactly. And besides the animation, the other thing that really stuck out to me first time viewing it, and then especially the second time when I was just thinking about what makes this movie such a classic, in many ways underrated, is it's the witty banter between especially the two main characters of Anastasia and Dimitri.
One of my favorite exchanges between them happens on the train. I've even seen stills of this on Pinterest, revealing myself as a Pinterest girly. But she looks at him and she says, "Do you really think that I'm royalty?" And he said, "You know I do." And so she says, "Then stop bossing me around."
Yeah, that yeah, it's great. The I don't think I mean a lot of other animated movies are pretty funny, but I don't think they rely as much on the banter between characters. And then right after that scene, Vladimir or Vlad, the guy also accompanying them, says that she certainly has a mind of her own. And Dimitri's response is, "Yeah, I hate that in a woman."
It's
And both his sister and I looked at each other and started laughing. It was great.
other movies aim for this level of zingers and witty banter and cleverness, but it still doesn't go above the head of the intended audience, which of course is
Exactly.
children.
Mhm.
Now, this next one that I wrote down might go over some children's heads, but I, as a Russian history enjoyer, did get a chuckle out of Vlad saying, "That's what I hate about this government. Everything's in red."
Yes, he's referring to the fact that they're now for well, not forfeited. Is that word? I can't even think of the word at the moment.
They're forging
Forging.
papers.
Thank you. Goodness, their forgery of their passports is no longer valid because last week the lettering was blue, but this week it's red. Yeah, that was a great moment, and I think they balance really well, like you were saying, the keeping the banter so children can understand it, but also that the adults who inevitably have to watch with their children also can enjoy it. And Meg Ryan, who voices Anastasia throughout most of the movie, said in the behind the scenes, she said that the romantic comedy banter, the rhythm of talking, I had never seen in an animated movie before. And I think it definitely sets this movie apart.
I have a brief backtrack because I just noticed something about the blue to red comment. It's almost like they went from Royal Romanov blue to Soviet red.
Also, another layer, yeah, that I
I did
didn't
not
keep
catch
up
that until
either.
just now.
See, this it just shows that this movie or any movie, we can really dig into it. You can just keep going.
Very true.
And then the other thing to be you notice, obviously you're gonna notice it because this is a musical. And while I am not the biggest fan of musicals, generally speaking, I will say the music in this film is outstanding. David Newman wrote the score, and then Lynn Ahrens wrote the lyrics, and Stephen Flattery wrote the music. And while we could highlight each of the songs, I think there are no misses in this score. We'll just look at a few of them in particular.
I think the first one we'll start with is Journey to the Past, which really, there's scenes before this, but this feels like the journey where it really starts for Anastasia. She's leaving the People's Orphanage, and this is her first big heroic moment song.
Yes, and I also love the messaging in a lot of these songs. Like it has a good message at its heart. And in particular, just a few of the lines are life is full of choices, one step at a time, one hope, then another.
I really love that this song, the tone of it is like hopeful and exciting and fun, even though the concept of your future being in your past can be a little bit sad.
Exactly. And of course, I think it's also interesting because she's literally standing at a fork in the road
That's
in this
true.
song. With if she goes one way, she's going to go become a cog in the machine, if you will, because she has a job at a fish factory. But if she has embraces the hope that there there is something in her past that will help her, she can go to St. Petersburg. Though of course at this time it would have been called Leningrad, but we won't go into
Leningrad,
those
not very fun
details.
for a children's movie.
No, exactly. And then I think probably it's really hard because there's two songs in this musical that are really close. I can't rank which one's better than the other. But the first one is Once Upon a December, which is based in like a little lyric song that her grandmother sang to her. She remembers the music behind it, if not the lyrics.
They do a really good job of integrating the songs into the movie. With some movies, it feels like, okay, now there's randomly a song happening. But in
Mhm.
this one, it feels like it's almost part of the narration because the movie begins with her grandmother narrating what's going to happen.
Voiced by
Then
the amazing Angela Lansbury.
Mrs. Potts herself from Beauty and the Beast.
Mhm.
And throughout the movie, there's a stretch where you don't really see her grandmother, but the song still plays in the background. Then at the end, she finishes by narrating the
No,
movie.
it's a great use of music, and like the technical term is leitmotif, which is just like a short series of musical notes that is connected to a person, a character, or even some type of like idea. Exactly. So the music works very well, and I guess I think that's one of my biggest beefs with musical, if you will, is like I'm always like, why are they singing? This makes no sense. But with this movie, I never really had that moment.
I also think the animation really helps with it. I can't rave enough about the animation. It makes it feel very magical in a way that I don't think movies really have anymore. We both had this exact same thought when she first shows up to the palace and sings Once Upon a December. All of these dancers who are dressed like they were in the past she can't quite remember come down and start dancing around her in her mind, and she envisions herself in this gorgeous gown, and it's like the the tricks they use at the haunted mansion at Disney
Exactly. And so
because
the
they're her
Meg Ryan,
ghosts.
yeah, Meg Ryan voices Anastasia, but the singing is done by Liz Calloway. And I found this song in particular very it's beautiful, but it's also so heartbreaking because she doesn't understand the emotions that this place is making her feel because she can't remember. And it just when you realize that it's truly heartbreaking because one of the last refrain of the song she sings far away long ago glowing dim as an ember things my heart used to know things it yearns to remember. It's just
Actually so sad and haunting and scary even if you think about it.
Yeah, and this the music, it starts very simple. Again, bringing in that very simple melody that her grandmother sang, and then once the ghosts, they're not really ghosts, but they come out of the porches, then this full orchestration comes in, and it sounds very similar to the opening ball music, and it I was blown away by the music in this song.
It even makes you think about like Russian composers. Russian, especially later on, their composers' music tends to be very sad. Like think about Rachmaninoff.
Mhm.
It's not upbeat, happy music like Tchaikovsky's can be.
Yeah,
It's heavier. It makes you think.
yeah, and like yeah, that's a good comparison, because like Rimsky-Korsakov is another Russian
Yeah,
composer, Prokofiev, and it definitely David Newman, it definitely invokes, and Stephen Flattery invoke the, I guess you can kind of call it like a Russian sound. I don't know if that's too
I definitely would.
oversimplistic. Although it's a musical, and typically, like I said, I don't like musicals. I think because the music itself is very emotive of the period, and it fits in so well that I didn't. Because other musicals, I feel like when they sing, it like just pulls me out of the movie and pulls me out of the story. But that did not happen with this movie.
Now, a song from this movie outside of Once Upon a December that will stick with you is the absolute banger by Rasputin in the Dark of the Night.
I know when I was watching, it's like, why does this song go so hard? And it's literally sung by the same guy who voices Winnie the Pooh and Jim Cummings. And I don't know, this song just, I was not prepared for it.
It's almost like every single song about Rasputin is destined to be an absolute banger.
That is true. Yeah. And then not only like the actual music behind it, but then some of the lyrics just really stood out to me. He near the beginning of the song, he says, "And I opened my eyes, and the villain was me." And then later on, as he's wrapping up and hitting the finale of the song, he says, "Soon she," referring to Anastasia, "will see that her nightmares are real."
Even if you don't watch this movie, which you absolutely should, no matter your age or gender, you should go on YouTube and look up In the Dark of the Night from Anastasia and listen to this song. I promise you, you will like it.
Yes, it's so good.
But to understand the true impact of this song, and if you think about this movie in a vacuum and you're not watching it, it's actually insane because this is Rasputin, who was, of course, a real person. But in the movie, he is singing this song in literal hell, which makes it sound bad, but I promise, just gotta watch it. But he is literally in hell singing this song.
About killing how old she would have been,
She
what,
probably was 18 because she
18 or
just got
19?
kicked
Yeah.
out of the orphanage.
Yeah. And he's so upset that he missed killing one of the Romanovs survived. Yeah, it's truly,
It's
it does not.
awesome.
Yeah, I'm like, why are the villain songs always so good? Like Be Prepared, which you pointed out was Jim Cummings sings the second half of, because it was a Jeremy Irons,
I think so.
uh was his voice broke during the recording of Lion King. But yeah, it was, I don't know, it's going on. Though I will say, I must say in this point, I'm very disappointed in Spotify, Apple Music, and all of the streaming music platforms, because you cannot find the original soundtrack for this movie. You can only find the Broadway recording, which it's a good recording, but there are differences which we won't really get into. But
The Broadway musical, which is amazing and was originally directed by Don Bluth, it tries to be a little more historically grounded. So it's more Soviet, less Rasputin, which is tragic because that's one of the best songs in the movie.
exactly, and I was so disappointed when I was looking for it that I couldn't find it, and I had to go onto YouTube. And the next part, and it fits really well with, as we enter the climax of the movie, you really can see the character growth of both Anastasia and Dimitri. And with Anastasia, I think she's a perfect example of a good, strong female main character, because she doesn't take any guff from anyone, including Dimitri. As we've already talked about, she is right up there with him in the banter. She doesn't let him, push her around. But she's also kind. She's compassionate. She cares for people, and not just people. She rescues a dog on her way to St. Petersburg. And I think this is what sets her apart from a lot of the modern female protagonists who are oftentimes abrasive and unlikable because writers are so focused on producing a strong female character, which that's a good thing, but you need to balance it out between strong, but also you need to make them a good person in as well.
That is true. She's I have so many thoughts on this. Now, Anastasia is the eponymous character of this movie, but Dimitri is my beloved. She's definitely what grounds the movie. You want to root for
Mm-hmm.
her. For the most part, it's aimed at girls, so girls see themselves in Anastasia. But Dimitri doesn't suffer to make her slay, which
You're
is,
very happy with that phrase.
I know I came up with that and I was like, I just did something there. But that is what I like about it is that his character doesn't suffer to develop her into a strong character of her own. His character growth
Mhm.
is so it's very enjoyable to watch because she's seeking an external goal, but his is very internal. He changes as a person.
Yeah, so they're both characters are have very interesting character growth in their own right, and one isn't pushed to the side to develop the other. And like he's charming, he's daring. He kind of comes off as the like he doesn't care, like he's just in this to get money. But then you realize that no, he actually does care, and he rescues her when she almost drowns because of Rasputin's machinations. And then I think the key moment he really turns the corner, if you will, is when he realizes that she actually is the real Anastasia, when she mentions that she remembers being led through the servants' quarters to escape once the Soviets took over.
I think you can even see a little bit of that from the beginning because he saves her and her grandmother, as a kitchen boy in the palace, even though he wouldn't have had to. It would have been safer if he'd have just run. But then he gets jaded and he almost circles back to as his character grows.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, because he risked his life, and he does end up getting knocked out by the communists who take over. Yeah, that is a very good point. And I think also we could mention just briefly the side characters are also all pretty likable with Vlad and then the Dowager, and I feel like all the characters. I mean, obviously Rasputin is made to be the villain. Like he's not. At least I didn't find him very sympathetic at all.
You kind of love him because he's a villain's villain. It's
Yeah,
very
like
over
he's
the
just
top.
bad. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
just bad. There's no pushing to make him sympathetic, and I think it helps in real life that he was a bad person. So
In real life, he's a lot more complicated. And interestingly, in the movie, I'm just going to try not to get too lost in the historical sauce, if you will. They don't include Anastasia's mother, Alexandra, in it too much. And it was really more her and Rasputin's influence over her that leads to the There's a million things that lead to the downfall of the Romanovs, but they took her out of the movie, and Rasputin wasn't so evil. He was more just like a weird guy who really got around, if you catch my drift.
yeah, that is a great way to putting it. I mean, I think they tried to make him. Well, they had his like fun evil sidekick Bat, I guess, whose
Now,
commentary was kind of funny.
this Rasputin sort of lacks the interpersonal charisma of the real Rasputin, who was a gross mystic monk who ladies couldn't get enough of, even though he didn't really bathe. So this one's charisma is more, and like I said, that he's a villain's villain.
Yeah, that is very true. Yeah, that is interesting that they like because he confronts Tsar Nicholas II in the movie, even though yeah, his main was and he was also like she was trying to heal her son from his hemophilia.
Interestingly, no hemophilia in this movie.
Yeah, we will not go into why diseases persisted so much in royal families, but Anyway, we are getting lost in the history, which kind of actually does bring us to what we really wanted to talk about with Anastasia. And this is, how do we look at historical fantasy? Like, how should, or not how should, but how, because we both, I think, could say, we're historians, and we both studied, while this is not my area, this is more your area, we both studied it. And sometimes historical movies, make me very angry, but sometimes they don't. And I think what it boils down to is, what was the filmmaker's intent, and how did they approach the source material? Did they treat it with respect? And I feel like for this movie, they did. So I'm much more inclined to like the movie.
I agree. I think historical fantasy is a great way to put it. This is like very, very soft alternate history because the movie isn't too concerned with being a history for you, which I think is completely fine in this type of movie for reasons we will get into more in a moment. It's it's that they treated these people, some of whom were real people who died, with respect. That's what I really don't like about a lot of alternate history or historical movies in general. People are more concerned with making a successful movie, sometimes even than making a good piece of art, but usually more than respecting the people who deserve respect that lived. People who were just trying to live a life, who were like the Romanovs died, many of them died very young, and I think it would be terrible to disrespect teens and a child who were killed horrifically.
Yeah. And I feel like for this movie in particular, they're using history more as a setting as opposed to this is what happened. I watched an interview with the directors, and Don Bluth said, "We are trying to take the myth that this girl lived and build a fairy tale around it." And I think that perfectly encapsulates not only the goal they were having in this film, and why I don't mind that it's not historically accurate. And then also in that same behind the scenes video, they interviewed a couple of the animators, and one was asked, like, how did he approach this project, and he said that he just kept reading books and more books. And of course, there's that is the way to go. And I will always encourage people to get into books and to read and read and read. And then also some of the animators spent time in St. Petersburg, walking around the city, taking pictures and videos, and you can just see the level of care and time they took to make Imperial Russia the setting for this fantasy.
I think that reflects how they did with the clothing as well. They were very, even though this is fantasy, they were very concerned with the aspects that could be historically accurate were historically accurate. And I think that's really influenced by what led to the making of this film, the cultural context that it was born
Mm-hmm.
of. I couldn't stop asking myself, why did they make this movie? Because the real story of the Romanovs, if you have any familiarity with it, is very horrific. They are slaughtered by political opponents. It was mostly women, one little boy, and an adult man, which is not great fodder for a children's movie. But the Soviet Union falls in the 90s, and they
Exactly.
have introduced a political policy called glasnost, which is they were making things more clear. The Soviets were not big in giving information to the people, and they were certainly not
Exactly.
big into giving information to outsiders. But in the 90s, this movie came out in 97, and around 1993 is when the writings of the man who was really responsible for leading the killing of the Romanovs is released. So the truth of their deaths is released to the public, and shortly after, this movie is born.
Exactly. And I think I've seen some videos on YouTube where people are just tearing into this movie from a historical point of view. And they're doing it in, like 2010, 2020. And like we are looking at this from 2025. And just like when you're studying actual history, you need to put it in the context that it happened. And the context of this movie is the 90s and the mid 90s and late 90s, where there is still a lot of mystery about whether or not Anastasia died. And it isn't actually until 2007 that they confirmed through DNA forensic testing that she did in fact die.
Those people are also, I'm gonna be mean for a moment. They're out of their minds. If you study history, you know that throughout the entire 20th century, this was something people were obsessed with. This story of this movie wasn't pulled out of a glass-nosed hat, if you will. People had been pretending to be Anastasia in real life, the most notable of which was Anna Anderson, who some family members of the Romanovs believed to be Anastasia. This story lived rent-free in people's minds since the Romanovs disappeared.
Exactly. And I think, well, sometimes I think people do it just for clickbait, to be honest. And you you have to realize, that this movie, came out when it did. And though I do have a serious question, is how is this movie G rated?
And that leads me into an absolute tirade that I've been percolating in my
Do you want me to
mind.
prepare your soapbox? Because we can
Yes,
go.
please. And I'm stepping up on it. This is very exemplary of how little girls play with dolls. Not to flash us back into the Barbenheimer summer of girlhood, but that feels appropriate given this very girl-oriented historical movie. Girls play viciously with their dolls. They imagine stories where specifically interpersonal drama, but sometimes wars happen, and girls love a lost princess story. And they still do. It's
Yeah,
the main plot of a lot of YA novels and even novels for adult women.
that are
This
happening right now.
that are very popular right now. I'm looking at you, Throne of Glass. This story is very representative of imaginative play, which I think is why you have to take into the account the audience of this movie. Crazy stuff happens that makes you say, "How is this G?" But girls are thinking that way already with their dolls, as I've pointed out. And this is representative of that, and it leads them into history in a way that is approachable. That's why you YouTubers can get off your soapbox while I'm on mine. Have you read an American Girl book? They're not sanitized, but they are at a level that is appropriate for children to understand and piques their curiosity, which this
Mhm.
certainly piqued my curiosity. It's the reason that I got into history in college. This mystery intrigued me. I needed to know more about the Romanovs.
Mhm.
I loved the visuals of the Russian culture. I wanted to know about the Bolsheviks and the revolution. And without this movie introducing it to me at a level I could understand, I don't know that I would have made the choices in my life that I have made.
Exactly. And I am always thrilled when a piece of media causes someone to go to a library or go to look up on the internet. Though obviously you have to be careful because there's a lot of unscholarly sources. But anything that drives someone to go and find out what actually happened makes me, as a historian, very happy. And while I don't have, this movie has nothing to do with where I ended up in my research and writing, there's other things that for me were key. Master and Commander being one of them, which maybe we'll get to someday. But yeah, you're exactly right, and I think we can both get off our maybe our pretend soapboxes now. But I think that what's making history accessible is a great goal.
Now, to help make history accessible to all of you, if you'd like to explore the story further, I would like to provide some of my favorite recommended readings. To start with, I think you can check out the YouTube videos. Actually, there's a lot of stuff on YouTube, but like Stephanie said, you got to take it with a grain of salt. But historians Robert K. Massie and Helen Rappaport have a lot of books and even YouTube videos about the Romanovs that are very interesting and engaging. Then there is the mother of all Romanov books, which is the Romanovs 1613 to 1918 by Simon Sebag Montefiore. And that, I've read the whole thing. It's very long, but there are sections that have pictures, one of which is a selfie the real Anastasia took of herself. It's very interesting. Probably audiobook it if you're not a big reader. Then I have one fiction recommendation, which I have not read myself, but has great reviews, which is Romanov by Nadine Brands.
And my sister recommended The Kitchen Boy. by Robert D. Zimmerman, and it's a great novel. And it, when she was watching the movie with me, she's like, Dimitri's character really brought this book back to her memory. So that one would probably also be a great read.
And with that, I'm unfortunately going to wrap up our discussion of one of my all-time favorite movies. Changed my life, and I am very glad I got to explore it with you.
It was great. I'm very grateful that you introduced me to this movie, and I wish I would have seen it earlier.
And I'm very glad I got to explore it with all of you out there. And I hope that you will join us for our Valentine's exploration of season 1 of Netflix's My Happy Marriage.